This Shabbos is about Pinchas. The parasha is Pinchas. And Pinchas is a very interesting character who is introduced to us through a very interesting story. So in order to get to this week's parasha, you have to read the end of last week's parasha that gives us context. In the end of last week's parasha, Bilam, who is exasperated by the fact that every attempt he made to curse the Jewish people failed, came up with another plan. He says, well, if we can't curse the Jews, then the next best thing is to get the Jews to sin, and then hopefully when they sin, Hashem will do the work for us. The sad thing is that it works. So at the end of last week's parasha, he sends Midianite women to seduce the Jewish men. Many Jewish people get caught up with this. The direct result of it is that the Midianite women say, okay, listen, if you want to be with me, you've got to serve this idol of mine, which was called the Peor idol. And as a result, 22,000 people die in a plague. So Pinchas is on scene when the worst moment of that interaction with the Midianite women happens. There's a guy called Zimri. He's the head of the tribe of Shimon. And he goes publicly with a woman, Cosby, who is a Midianite princess. He schleps her in front of Moshe, in front of everybody, like gets a whole crowd together. And he says, right, Moshe, may I or may I not be with this woman? And before Moshe can even answer, he says, and if you're going to tell me that I may not be with her because she is a Midianite, well, what about you? You married a Midianite. That's classic Jewish, right? Rabbi, you're a hypocrite. So at that point, Pinchas gets up and he takes a spear or a lance or whatever it is, and kaboom, he takes them out. And it's a shocking moment for the Jewish community, as you can well imagine, because who is this guy, Pinchas? I mean, they knew that he was a grandson of Aaron, he came from a good family, but up until that point in time, he was really just a quiet member of the society who had never asserted himself in any way. And now suddenly, in front of Moshe, he takes the law into his own hands and he does this radical thing, and he kills a Jewish leader. I mean, it's a really big controversy. So in this week's parasha, Hashem vindicates him. And Hashem says, he stood up for my honor. He protected the Jewish people from this ongoing plague. And therefore, number one, he's going to become a Kohen. And number two, he will have what is called Brisi Shalom. He will have the covenant of peace. Something you would never have expected, that the result of a violent act would be that Hashem promises him peace. Amazing. It sounds totally incongruous. So let's get into the shoes of Pinchas for a minute and understand what the story is over here. Pinchas, like I said, he was a quiet person. Nobody really knew much about him. Pretty much in the sidelines. And the next thing, he's catapulted into this front and center of the Jewish world. Headline news, and on the face of it, for all the wrong reasons. So imagine you're Pinchas, standing over there, watching the story unfold. The following are the considerations that Pinchas would have had to have. Number one, Moshe is there. Moshe is the expert. Moshe is the leader. And Moshe is not doing anything. So any thinking person would say, I'm sure that Moshe has an insight that I don't have. So why should I go nuts and start reacting if Moshe himself is quiet? So that's the first thing. Second of all, Pinchas, let's imagine the scene. Pinchas gets up with his spear and he starts running towards this guy Zimri, about to kill him. If, let's say, for argument's sake, that Zimri happened to have a weapon of his own, he would be 100% within his rights to kill Pinchas in self-defense. 100%. Pinchas is not a representative of the courts. Pinchas is not even a policeman. He's not a law enforcement. He's an ordinary person running at somebody with a weapon. So had Zimri brought out his own weapon and killed Pinchas, he would have been 100% within his rights. So Pinchas not only takes a reputational risk, how dare you speak up in front of Moshe, he takes a physical risk. Not only that, but there was a crowd standing around watching. And legally, anybody in that crowd, if they would have seen Pinchas running with his spear, would have had the right to kill Pinchas to protect Zimri, because the law is that if you witness somebody who's about to murder somebody else, you have the right halachically to stop them with any force, including lethal force. So Pinchas took a massive risk over here. Massive. He put his life on the line to do something that was apparently questionable. Nobody else is reacting, including Moshe, so that indicates that it's questionable. And for this reason, Pinchas becomes one of the icons in Jewish history for the principle of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is the willingness to sacrifice yourself for what Hashem would want you to do. Now, it turns out that Pinchas was correct, and it turns out that the law in this very unique situation of a man who parades his non-Jewish mistress in front of the community and makes a public spectacle of it, the law is that any spectator is allowed to take the law into their own hands, but nobody's allowed to instruct them to do it. So the only way Pinchas could have reacted would have been to take a risk and do something of his own volition. So it turns out he was right. But in order to do what was right, he required Mesiras Nefesh, a tremendous sense of personal sacrifice. He took a huge risk. It could have cost him everything. It could have cost him his lineage, could have cost him his family, his reputation. It could have even cost him his life. So for that reason, Pinchas is now seen as the icon of Mesiras Nefesh, that it's important as a Jewish person to be willing to sacrifice in order to do what Hashem wants. Most people understand that Mesiras Nefesh just means to put your life on the line. And you go back throughout history, and we know that there are people throughout our history who died with Mesiras Nefesh, when they were offered the choice, the sword or the cross, when they were offered the choice to give up their Jewish identity or be killed, like, for example, in the story of Purim. So Jews throughout our history have always said, we're going to stand firm, and you can threaten us as much as you want. We won't relinquish our Jewish identity. That is called Mesiras Nefesh, the willingness for a person to die for Hashem's sake. But in Hasidus, we explain that there's another layer to this, because, let's be honest, that kind of Mesiras Nefesh, number one, it doesn't happen to everybody. Not everybody is offered the opportunity, and you can't volunteer. You can't say, hey, pick me, I'd like to go on Mesiras Nefesh, I believe it's a big thing. Number two, you can only do it once. So, it's not a very effective way of building a relationship with Hashem. It's in a crisis situation. So Hasidus explains that there's another form of Mesiras Nefesh, and that is Mesiras Haratzon. Nefesh, myself. What is myself? Where do I express myself most deeply? In the things that I really, really want. So here's somebody who's willing to give up his life for Hashem. That's called Mesiras Nefesh. I could do that in no small measure, by the way, if I'm willing to give up things that I really want because Hashem does not want them. So let's say nobody kills Pinchas. The one thing that he for sure would lose is the opportunity to be a Kohen. Now, it's interesting. His father's a Kohen, his grandfather's a Kohen, but the technical rule at the time was that only the hand-picked people were going to become a Kohen, and from there on, their sons would become Kohanim. Pinchas missed it on both sides. He was born too early, and he wasn't hand-picked. So there's one thing he feels like, I'm a little bit of an outcast. Everybody else in the family is a Kohen except me. Well, you know who would lose their status as a Kohen? Somebody who murders. So the one thing that he would have wanted to perhaps somehow be included in the family of Kohanim, he put on the line by killing these people, because that should have disqualified him from being a Kohen. So Pinchas is not only an icon for willingness to risk your life for God, he's an icon for Mesiras Nefesh, being the willingness to sacrifice what I really, really want and care about in favor of what Hashem wants. So what happens to somebody who's willing to do that? What happens when a person is willing to say, you know what, I've done X for my whole life and I really love and enjoy it, but today I'm going to start a program of stepping back from X because it's actually not mandated or authorized by Torah. Whatever that particular behavior is, I'm going to do it. What's the reward? Two things. Number one, we're told that Pinchas is given Brisi Shalom. Hashem gives him a covenant of peace. And everybody wants peace in their life. There's too much conflict. There's too much competition. There's too much envy. There's too much anxiety. There's too much depression. Everybody wants shalom. We want peace in our lives. Stability, tranquility. So that's the first bracha that a person gets, and that's personal. It's a personal bracha. My life becomes more settled because I'm willing to relinquish my own interests in the face of what Hashem wants. The second is global. It makes a global impact. How do we know that? So the Gemara tells us, Pinchas ze Eliyahu. In this story, Pinchas is this man, Pinchas, who, by the way, later becomes a leader in the Jewish community. But we believe in reincarnation, and the Gemara tells us, Pinchas, this character of Pinchas, he comes back later in history as the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. And Eliyahu Hanavi's main job, he's got a few jobs. He's got to visit every bris, and apparently we expect him at the Pesach Seder. But his primary job, Eliyahu's primary job, is that it's for him to herald Mashiach. Pinchas, their work, the service of Hashem that is modeled after Pinchas, the service of Hashem, the willingness to sacrifice for Hashem, Ze Eliyahu. That's what brings Eliyahu, who will introduce Mashiach. In other words, the best thing, the most powerful thing that we could do to hasten the coming of Mashiach is to be willing to do things for Hashem that come at a personal cost, that are difficult for me, that I perhaps imagine I would never be able to do. When I take that major step and I push myself beyond the limit, that's the most incredible thing to do to bring Mashiach. So please God, we should all have a little bit of Pinchas, and please God, we should have a lot of Eliyahu, and we should see Mashiach now.